Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, all quiet on the federal cannabis front, but the battle over hot hemp heats up in Washington, D.C. at a House hearing.
To what extent has FDA regulated hemp-derived products like CBD?
They haven't, and we as an industry are begging for that regulation.
And in Texas, hundreds marched to the State House to protest the threats of shutting down their hemp industry in the Lone Star State. We talked to the J Man Jerry Joyner.
The pro-hemp people came out in forces at the Capitol on Monday.
The president's tariff strategy has been exposed around the world, and now, even with a 90-day delay, plant-touching and ancillary equipment makers in the cannabis industry are getting crushed. How much more can this industry take? In the meantime, a judge in Minnesota sets the stage for the launch of their adult-use legal market, with the first licenses finally to be awarded by this summer. And more criminal unrest in Oregon, where violence and robberies continue to target licensed shops and grows. So where is law enforcement now? All that and more on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another weekly edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, PCM TV's production of the battle to end cannabis prohibition here in the United States and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. Have you downloaded our app yet? It is the easiest way to access our weekly shows and the archive from the past 4 years of news that document the fight to end cannabis prohibition. You can scan the QR code to take you directly to the App Store or Google Play. Just don't forget, if you are searching for it, it's PCM Space TV. We start in Washington, D.C. today, where President Trump continues to shake up the world's economy with the launch of his trade war over tariffs. The cannabis industry is not immune to these tariffs, and many vape manufacturers and ancillary equipment companies are all feeling the economic crunch on their bottom line. If the strategy by the federal government, past and present, was to make it as difficult to survive as possible, they are doing a great job, as many companies are getting out to cut the losses they've already suffered. But here's Andrew Behringer in Washington, D.C. with more.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The American cannabis industry is scrambling to adjust as President Trump's tariff policies ripple through their global supply chains. With many essential components manufactured overseas, businesses are finding creative ways to avoid passing costs on to the consumers, well, at least for now. Following President Trump's implementation of a 10% blanket tariff on all imports earlier this month and a staggering 145% tariff specifically on Chinese goods, cannabis companies are being forced to rapidly adapt. This manufacturing gap has led companies like Custom Cones USA to take action. While they've moved some production stateside, their core products still rely on facilities in Indonesia and India. The company's COO explains that if these tariffs remain in place, the cost of pre-rolls will inevitably rise. Currently, there is no viable way to manufacture cones at scale in the US. For now, many businesses are absorbing the increased expenses rather than raising prices. Some companies which source rolling papers from France and cones from India are maintaining current pricing despite squeezed profit margins. Industry experts warn of unintended consequences, while some executives believe that the tariffs might eventually bring manufacturing back to American soil. Most are focused on the immediate challenge of keeping products affordable during these uncertain economic times. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
When the Farm Bill was passed in 2018, the obvious reaction by those in the know was positive, since our elected officials legalized the cannabis sativa plant. Congress thought by limiting the THC percentage to a mere 0.3% at dry weight would make the plant impotent. Human behavior and science figured out a way to create THCA, which in dry weight is defined as hemp, but once you ignite it, that turns that product into its intoxicating form. And now add in the fact that Congress expected the FDA to come up with regulations and rules by now about what cannabinoids can go into food or drinks and at what amount. But now, 7 years later, we are still waiting for those rules and guidelines. In the meantime, the hemp industry is flourishing to the tune of over $2 billion in sales and growing at a 20% annual rate. Even the biggest cannabis MSOs are turning to the hemp-infused beverages and products market, which are still not regulated or tested. The biggest hemp market is in Texas, which, according to a new report by Whitney Economics, is responsible for over $5.5 billion into the Texas economy and $268 million in tax revenue. So why would lawmakers and political leaders in that state want to shut it down? Especially when you add in the fact that there are over 50,000 people employed in that industry in Texas. This week, hundreds of protesters showed up in Austin, the capital of the Lone Star State, to protest that legislature's efforts to ban all hemp-derived products. PCM TV founder Jimmy Young talked to the Texas J Man Jerry Joyner about this latest battle.
Thanks, Alaina. You know that story in Texas this week with the big protest in Austin because those legislators in that state house in Texas are trying to do everything they can to get rid of intoxicating hemp. Jerry Joyner, the man, the myth, the legend from Texas joins us. And Jerry, tell me a little bit. Is it a lost cause in Texas to fight against hemp?
Oh, no, not at all, Jimmy. You know, the pro hemp people came out in forces at the Capitol on Monday. They had a huge turnout, overflowing into the hallways. The politicians, I believe, Jimmy, were deliberate in delaying testimony into the night for the pro hemp, or the people that were against SB 3 and SB 28. Some beverage people came along and tried to end around all of our hemp friends, and they're in the hemp business with a House bill HB 28, which said only drinks could be sold in Texas. Well, that got pushed away to the side big time, and the scuttlebutt that I hear is that it's they're not going to vote on it. They're just going to let the bill die in the House.
I was just going to say, if the bill dies, does the fight go away too? But you're telling me the Senate now wants to get rid of all the hemp.
But the Senate, it passed the Senate, went to the House. Okay. Nobody in the House has picked up on supporting this bill or even adding any caveats to it yet. There's been a little talk about age gating. All the good players here in Texas, they want child-proof packaging. They want to sell to adults, okay? They want to sell products that's got a good certificate of analysis. Jimmy, that's a problem not just in Texas, but nationwide, where some certificates of analysis aren't accurate. And so, you know, it's like anything else, folks. 95% of the people are good actors, and they want to abide by the rules and do the right things. This is an $8 billion industry for us here in Texas. I truly believe that it's going to die in the House, and we'll get 2 more years before something comes up. Here in Texas, once the legislative session is over, it'll take 2 years before they convene to vote on this. Now, we've got till June, and we're holding out and hoping, you know, good Lord willing, the creek don't rise, that the House will stay with us and not ban the hemp.
Well, let's hope so. And of course, you know, it's so funny you mentioned about regulations. In Washington, D.C., there was a hearing this week on hemp. And one of the things that the general counsel of the US Hemp Roundtable brought up was, we want regulations. We want guidelines. They just want to be left alone. Look, it's the polar opposite to what goes on in the adult use legal THC Delta 9 areas, the 24 states that have this, because they're over-regulated and the hemp people are under-regulated. And you know whose fault that is? The people who passed the Farm Bill, people who passed the Farm Bill in 2018, they had no idea what they were doing. And that just exposes our elected officials to not doing their jobs. Do research, do due diligence. Why wouldn't they do that? It just drives me nuts.
I thought, Jimmy, you know, I have 65 worlds around the sun in a few days. 420 is old J Man's birthday. And I always thought the politicians were supposed to support and represent their constituents.
Yeah.
And if 75% of Texans say this should be legal, why wouldn't they say, hey, let's find a way to keep this legal, but make sure we got some guidelines instead of doing an all-out ban? When has an all-out ban on anything ever worked in our lives?
That's
Nobody wants an all-out ban.
Jerry, if I remember, this product was prohibited for decades, and plenty of people managed to find their way to someone in the area, on whether you call it cartel, whatever you want to call it. The people that like this product will always find a way to find it and buy it.
I agree, Jimmy. And I've been guilty of that. I'm a patriotic, law-abiding American, except for when it came to cannabis. And Jimmy, I got arrested for 2 joints in 1992. I got arrested in Collin County, Texas, for 2 joints. My employer at the time, I worked for a fella, came to the court as a friend of the court and said, "Judge, this is my best salesman. You can't put him in jail for having 2 joints." And he worked it out, Jimmy, where I had to go in on Friday night at 6 o'clock. I got out on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. so I could get 4 days of fun in jail with like real criminal guys, okay? Because I had 2 joints, that's just ridiculous. But thank you, Bill Thomas, for coming and supporting me and saying, hey, just because this guy smokes a little pot, he's doing a damn good job for my company. So I'm so glad, Jimmy, guys like you and I, we've gone through an era of really, we were in the closet about this. We didn't want anybody to know. Your broadcasting career could have been in jeopardy at some of the stations you were with if you would have been really talking about, oh man, I'm a supporter of this plant. But now we got freedom, don't we, brother? You and me, we've been trudging along, and
we're getting closer. We're getting closer, but it is still a battle at the federal level, and that should never give up. And I give everybody in Texas a lot of credit for being active in the fight to rid these prohibitionists from our elected offices. That, to me, needs to happen next. Jerry Joyner from Texas, thank you so much. So appreciate you lending your color to the news.
Also this week in Washington, D.C., a hearing was held by the House Oversight Committee titled Restoring Trust in the FDA, Rooting Out Illicit Products. Keep in mind that these illicit products were created by the passing of the Farm Bill of 2018, defining hemp as a cannabis sativa product with under 0.3% THC. 7 years later, that billion-dollar industry is still waiting for the FDA to do their job and come up with regulations and rules about CBD, CBG, CBN, and other cannabinoids that are being inserted into products. Just to explain how Congress screwed this whole thing up is to check out the sign that was on display at the hearing. On the left, an image of rope made by hemp with the caption, "This is what we thought we were getting." And on the right, these are the products they got. Cannabinoid-infused products that are being sold at gas stations, smoke shops, and convenience stores. And yes, plenty of those products feature colorful labels attracting underage use and sales. Here's an excerpt from that hearing featuring the chair of that committee, James Comer, and Jonathan Miller, the general counsel of the US Hemp Roundtable.
To what extent has FDA regulated hemp-derived products like CBD?
They haven't, and we as an industry are begging for that regulation.
Why hasn't the FDA refused to regulate hemp and its derivatives, despite having the authority to do so, and despite the leading organization representing the credible manufacturers and producers of hemp, begging them to do that?
They've gone back and forth. They initially said that they were going to regulate products, and then they have now claimed they need to have congressional authorization to allow them to regulate that. We dispute that. And I do want to mention, because Congressman Sessions raised that issue about youth use of these products, we as an industry strongly oppose the sale of these products or the marketing of these products to children, and really are looking for the FDA's help to make sure that that doesn't happen.
How long would it take the FDA to do something like this? I mean, what are we talking here?
Well,
do we need a gazillion bureaucrats that work from home, or I mean, can what's involved in FDA regulate this, especially when you have the industry wanting to be regulated?
So there currently are a number of safeguards under current law that the FDA could use and has chosen not to use. Within the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. For example, the law precludes manufacturers and distributors from selling mislabeled or adulterated products, and it requires the manufacture and sale of products consistent with good manufacturing practices. The law also requires reporting of serious adverse events, and it mandates strict labeling, including, if FDA desires, warning against the use of products by children. Finally, the FDA, with the Consumer Product Safety Commission, could require childproof packaging. So there's existing laws out there that they can take advantage of.
Seems to me those questions by the congressman might have been better served if there was actually a member of the FDA at these hearings, but that alone is a bit of an oversight, right? 7 years and counting now for the FDA to act. Once again, an example of the delaying tactics that the government continues to practice. Okay, next up is a state that was one of the oldest legal markets in the country, Oregon. And it was the fourth state to legalize the possession and growing of cannabis. But as Marianne Corsagi explains, the industry is now being victimized by vandals and thieves who are targeting the already overwhelmed legal industry.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. For the second week in a row, the headline out of Oregon is the current crime spree. Almost nightly, there are robberies and burglaries of licensed farms, dispensaries, wholesalers, and processors. The destruction of product and facilities can be business ending for a small family-owned business. Not to mention the toll on the humans who are pistol whipped, held at gunpoint, and forced to endure this crime. This week, wholesaler Shades PDX announced they are shutting down after having their warehouse robbed twice. The owner, Joel Stewart, says it feels like the soul of cannabis has been ripped out. Also this week, the Lane County Sheriff's Office served warrants and made arrests at several facilities operating outside the bounds of their license. Over 10,000 plants were seized, along with several hundred pounds of cannabis. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One more note from Oregon. Based on Marianne's report, this will come as no surprise. Officials from that state still don't know if the $46 million collected through taxes is going towards cutting back on the crime wave targeting cannabis operators. So that's not an excuse, just an observation of what is getting out of control in that state. Over the past few years, the state of Florida has tried to make changes to their already existing medical cannabis market that is dominated by Trulieve and features over 800,000 registered patients. Now there's a Florida bill being introduced that would waive the registration fee of $75 for all veterans who are in the medicinal program. The bill would extend the need for a renewal from 1 year to 2 years, but if there is no fee for veterans, why would that even be in this bill? If passed, the new law could be implemented by July 1st of this year. Next up, Arizona with Karen Black, who has an interesting story about a driver who was involved in an accident with a school bus. Driving under the influence of cannabis might be a factor in this case. Here's Karen.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A school bus crash near Marana, Arizona, involving 35 high school students, has reignited concerns over cannabis impairment and testing. 3 people sustained serious injuries, including one whose hand was amputated. Another 4 were hospitalized. The collision occurred when an SUV driven by Nicholas Luis Rodriguez struck the bus, causing it to roll onto its side. Rodriguez tested positive for THC and admitted to smoking cannabis 2 days prior. Field sobriety tests indicated impairment, but proving cannabis-related DUI cases remains a challenge, largely because the methods lack the precision of alcohol testing. A recent Arizona Court of Appeals ruling further complicates enforcement, requiring proof of actual impairment rather than just the presence of THC metabolites. This case highlights the urgent need for improved testing methods for cannabis-related impairment. Rodriguez, faces multiple felony charges. 5 cannabis-related bills remain under consideration as Arizona lawmakers approach the end of the legislative session. The controversial House Bill 2179 aims to limit marijuana advertising to licensed establishments and nonprofit dispensaries while setting penalties for noncompliance. With just weeks left, stakeholders on both sides are closely monitoring all 5 measures as they could significantly impact Arizona's cannabis industry. Arizona's consumer cannabis scene is buzzing with activity this week. Gelato Canico, a popular brand from California and Michigan, has officially launched in Arizona, bringing its vape cartridges, gummies, and edibles to 97 dispensaries statewide. Gelato also made its debut at Budzapalooza, a massive 420 festival that took over 8 blocks in downtown Phoenix. The event featured live music, comedy, stoner films, glass-blowing demos, and a vendor village showcasing top cannabis brands. Adding to the excitement, Curaleaf has partnered with Sluggers to release Arizona-themed cannabis packs featuring strains named after iconic state landmarks. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A Block, our first section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, but we've got plenty more reports from the U.S. And in our next section, we will check in with Ben Stevens in Europe and Debbie Facey in Canada. It's our international block. Plus, the Supreme Court in Michigan has shot down law enforcement's opportunity to stop motorists who might be using their cars to fire up. If the police smell it, they now will not be able to use that as just cause to stop and search your car for the product. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
Ready to take your craft to the next level? Imagine faster extractions, purer products, and more profits. Sounds good, right? At Pure 5 Extraction, we've revolutionized cannabis extraction with our game-changing technology. No solvents, no heat, just the cleanest, most natural process on the market. Whether you're a boutique grower or a large-scale operation, Pure 5 has the tools to elevate your business worldwide. Visit pure5extraction.com today. Pure 5 Extraction, because your plants deserve the best.